Joining me now. You know what? I'm just going to refer to him how Zach Lowe refers to him on his podcast. He is the people's champ. I mean, there are other people that may think they are the people's champ. They're not the people's champ. Chris Herring of Sports Illustrated is the people's champ. Hello, Chris. How are you?
I'm really appreciative of that. I don't know how to take it, but I'll say thank you. But I'm okay. How are you?
I love making other people, because I get uncomfortable, really uncomfortable when people throw like compliments at me that are like a little over the top. So it's just my way of dealing with that is to do the exact same thing to other people who may be even more uncomfortable with it than I am. So
you got me dead to rights in that sense. I'm extremely uncomfortable, but thank you.
Well, I am well. Thank you for asking. Thanks for joining us. Obviously, we got an NBA season about to kick off. You're an incredibly busy man. And that's actually where I want to start, because I was thinking about it. We're getting to October in a couple of days. And I'm like, so it's September. A year ago in September, there was a basketball season going on, and then it stopped. And then we played a whole nother basketball season, and then that stopped. And then we had a break, and now we're playing another basketball season, and it's a year. And you report obviously about this league as well as anyone. And during all that time, you had a book that you were finishing up. And I just want to start by asking you, like, how has the last year and change been for you?
Shambles mostly.
It's an honest response.
I mean, it's the truth. I've just been like, I was trying to take vacation at work, and recently, actually, in the last month, and I was like, okay, I'm going to take next week off. And they're like, oh, well, Howard's got next week off. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, then I'm going to take the week after that off. They're like, well, Mannix has the next week off. And I'm like, okay, it's like playing a game of musical chairs and everyone's already sitting down somewhere. So I'm like, do I get to, and like, in fairness, that's partially me not communicating well with my bosses about, when I can have off, but there's that. So I ended up taking vacation last week, but I just started teaching at Northwestern again last week, which I couldn't do during the time that I was working on the book, just because I had no time. So I used my vacation to start another job. So it's like just not that much time off. And I've been really vocal about this, I think, on a handful of podcasts. Like, I love the league, I think, more than most people. I don't love it enough to where I get really excited to go to summer league. I can't love it that much, but
that's fair.
And I think some of that has to do with just Vegas and how literally exhausting Vegas is with the heat and everything else. And but I think the biggest thing, it's just, I don't like the idea of having essentially 2 seasons within like a season and a half. That's kind of how it's felt. And some people are like, this is so cool. And I think it's really cool. Like, if you don't have any responsibilities outside of just having to watch it, if you have to cover it, and, and everybody was like, oh man, we need sports back, during the pandemic. And I understood that, but it's for people that were trying to juggle both the reality of like having to work as part of putting the league on. And I think the players were a part of that.
Sure.
And having to be away from their families and stuff like that. It was stressful. And trying to do the book was, during that time, it was certainly advantageous for me to have, 4 months where the league wasn't playing where it was supposed to have been playing, to just be able to sit and write.
Sure.
But, during a chunk of the pandemic, I was in a relationship that, quite frankly, fell apart because of the distance that I needed to write the book and the isolation that I needed to write the book. So a lot of people were like moving in with significant others during the pandemic. I was doing, I guess, not the opposite necessarily, because we weren't living together, but my girlfriend at the time and I did not get any closer. And I think it actually did the opposite. So like there was, and in my acknowledgments in the book, I apologized to family and friends. And I kind of feel like there were casualties in this, as far as just trying to finish the book and, not being able to see people. It takes something out of you, which I'm proud of it. And I think the book is better for it, but it's a hard process to really get it right and to get everything in there that you want in there. And, it's funny. Like, I'm sure I'd like to do it again at some point. And part of the reason I think it was better to do it now is that I don't have a family. I don't have children, so I don't have really people to answer to. But the one person that I sort of had to answer to, I'm not with anymore. So
no,
maybe that answers the question too honestly, but it's
no, but that's why you're Chris Herring. You're real, one, but also, and I don't know you well, but when I kind of do feel like I know you in that, I feel like achieving balance in your life is something that is not something that is just a buzzword for you. In that I imagine just in hearing you talk about it, I can imagine how there was probably some conflict going on within you during this time to try to, because you're also someone that obviously, because you've gotten to the place you have in your career, who is goal oriented and likes to achieve goals. So I can't imagine that time was very easy, although obviously it's cool to write a book and all that. Don't get me wrong, but yeah. So congratulations on being done. Right.
No, I appreciate that. I've never been more proud of anything. I'm so hopeful, not just for the book, but for the things that, hopefully will happen because of the book and things that can be done with the book, on maybe a bigger scale. I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to do it. And, I'm really, really hopeful. I mean, obviously Knicks fans know I've got a big place in my heart for them. And I'm hopeful that for people that watch those teams and, bled and lived and died with those teams, that they'll feel like it, not only that they get to read something about those teams, but that they learn something new about them. Because I always read reviews of books and Amazon reviews, and you see the ones that are like, this is just a rehash. And like, I was determined to not have folks say that about this. I felt like I spent a lot of time trying to, talk to people about stuff that wasn't in the news clippings or, that wasn't part of the narrative at the time. And so I'm hopeful that comes across, because you never want to work on something for 2.5 years and then feel like everybody's like, I've read this already. It's just the worst. It would be the worst feeling if it happens. So I hope it's not that. I
mean, I not having read it, I could say pretty confidently that will not be the feeling anyone gets. But I also just wonder, again, hearing you talk about this, it must be tempting because, and again, we don't have to talk about it too much, but I imagine writing a book is hard and you run into dead ends, and those dead ends get incredibly frustrating. And I imagine there are points in time where it could be very tempting to feel like, well, I've done so much in this area, or I've done so much digging, and I could it's fine. It's fine. I could end this thing at this point, but to then push beyond that when, correct me if I'm wrong, no one knows if you're pushing beyond that point except you.
Right.
Am I right about this?
No, absolutely. I mean, there's so many things, and there were so many things even at the end of the reporting process where like there were some really serious sorts of things that people would like bring up in the course of our conversation where I'm like, it felt like someone was like dropping an explosive device in my lap. And, it's like Mission Impossible where you can hear the clock ticking down or something. It's like, what am I supposed to do with this when my book deadline's in like a month? And then also trying to figure out like, okay, this is a pretty serious sort of allegation that's being thrown out there. Like, how do I confirm this with enough people? Can I confirm it? Will anyone help me confirm it with the time I've got left? And would I realistically rearrange the book for certain? So it's like, it's crazy to think that a lot of that stuff never sees the light of day. And, you talk about cutting room floor stuff and material that would be almost stuff like we're trying to figure out who to distribute the book to in the media and stuff like that. You and I were just talking about that before the podcast. And, I'm trying to figure out like what reporters that cover other teams that the Knicks were rivals with, because there's like new information on them and, and stuff that's never been out there about them that they would have interest in. But also like over at any given point of like the reporting, like stuff on past presidents and stuff that's like never been out there. And then I'm like, wait a minute, this is like a really serious sort of thing to say about like a former president. So then having to go back and trying to like nail that down and then realizing really quickly, oh, that couldn't have happened the way you just described it. So it's weird because it's, the book has to hold up to a really high level of scrutiny. So if you tell me something about Richard Nixon that he said in the presence of Patrick Ewing, there are going to be historians that take really big interest in this. Somebody told me that Richard Nixon came to a Knicks game, which he did, by the way.
I did not know that.
The Knicks had been in the middle of a really long home winning streak, which they were. Okay. But then the game that he came to, they lost at home. And so, the Knicks had already talked to Richard Nixon beforehand. He wanted to bring his grandson to the game. And so he comes, they had already asked him during the game or before the game, we'd love for you to meet our players after the game and take a picture. And so he'd already agreed to it, comes to the locker room. This was the way the story was told to me.
It was told to you. Okay. Yeah.
So, he comes down to the locker room. The players are, they've lost at home for the first time in months. So they are not in the greatest mood. But Patrick Ewing in particular felt bad because, there's a president sitting amongst them or standing amongst them, and they didn't perform well in front of them. So Patrick Ewing gets out of like his ice bucket and, apologizes to Richard Nixon for the Knicks performance that day. And the way the story was told to me is Richard Nixon pats Patrick on the shoulder. He said, "That's okay, Patrick. Sometimes in life, you've got to learn the hard way. If you can't beat them, cheat." And I was like blown away, like my jaw had dropped. And again, this is a sort of thing where if that's actually the case, there are going to be presidential historians that are like, I mean, obviously Richard Nixon is known for having not necessarily followed the rules with certain things, but that's something where like that would be quoted and would probably be pulled out. Like my friend Miran Fader wrote a book on Giannis that, is a bestseller and deservedly so. It's such a good book.
We talked to her about it on this podcast.
Yes. And I mean, just as someone who's really close friends with her, I know that she was a little bit frustrated at times about the material that people were choosing to seize upon.
Well, you can't control that though, right?
You can't control it at all, but they were so much more focused on like Jason Kidd and the Android detail about how, Kidd, essentially sent somebody home or punished someone or yelled at someone for not being part of the iPhone group. And it got aggregated repeatedly. And I'm like, well, I know that would happen with this Nixon detail because there would be politics people that would seize upon that.
Yeah, sure.
Who gives a damn about the Knicks? But like Richard Nixon was encouraging someone else to cheat.
But how do you reconcile that if you know the thing that you put in the book? Like, I don't know what your reasons for writing the book are. I have an idea of what they are. But if you know that something is going to get in there that is not necessarily representative of the ethos of the book, and you know that that's going to be the thing that's plastered, like, do you have to have a conversation with yourself about, okay, I've confirmed this. I know it's true, but do I want to put it in?
I think you probably have to put elements of something in, but you don't want to, it's more like how much attention do you pay to it? Okay. If you put something in, but not all of it, then, it's going to get aggregated. But if you focus on it for a whole chapter, it's probably the likelihood that's going to be aggregated is greater. And you're also giving people more material to build entire stories around instead of just a couple sentences. But anyway, before we get too far removed from it, that detail about Nixon saying that to Ewing and the team was not accurate. And I was able to prove very quickly that it wasn't accurate. But it's the sort of thing where it's like, it's not even just the stuff that ends up on the cutting room floor that is true, but it's also the stuff that you have to prove, at least to yourself, either be able to verify that it's true or to say, well, I can't prove it, so we have to cut this out. In that case, I just don't think it happened. A couple of people were like, I was right there. I don't remember him saying that. So it's important, but it's crazy because, the value of fact checking, this was really serious to me. This is a book that will sit on library shelves, hopefully forever. I hope libraries are around long enough to do that. But like, it's not a story where, it's not a blog or a story where you can just change, you go in CMS and you just change it. It's a book and it's people's lives that you're writing about. And there were a lot of people that were really reluctant to speak with me that I convinced to speak with me. The last thing you want is to kind of sully their name or to have a detail in there that's totally inaccurate or totally wrong. So, I'm basically all these details in the book, you're going and you're checking through with multiple people to make sure that it happens.
So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to ask you a completely unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. People look up to you. You're, again, don't respond to it, but I'm just going to say you're as good as they come in this business. You know what you're doing. You know what you're doing because you've written for some of the best publications in the world. This process to get a book written that is both very good and very deep and very accurate, and not very accurate, is accurate. There is no very accurate. It's either accurate or it's not accurate. And to make sure that you could put your head on the pillow at night knowing everything I put in that book, because you've done the fact checking and everything else. Is this the type of thing where like a person who's maybe a journalist starting out, or a person who is an aspiring writer or something, I almost feel like would because of how you're talking about this process, would you tell them like, this is not an endeavor for you to start with, like in the first several years of your career? Like you need to be kind of, I don't know, like how do you even phrase it? You need to be an expert reporter to even begin to engage in a process like this. I'm just curious, because like everybody who's ever written anything has had the notion like, oh, maybe I'll write a book someday. Like, what would you tell those people about when do you get to the point where you're like, I know what I'm doing enough to be able to do this and do it the right way?
No, I don't think I would say that. I mean, I don't try to really go out of my way to tell people what they should or shouldn't do, or what they should or shouldn't strive for. I'll also be really honest, and hopefully this is a little bit of a plug for him. Paul Nepper, who's a Knicks fan, and his blog before about it, I think for Bleacher Report, about the sport. He did a book, and he and I had I guess kind of a direct message conversation where he was explaining to me kind of his process, and I think another podcast. we've had and I feel like, I mean, I certainly told him this, that I felt bad. I think the timing just kind of worked out strangely. I didn't know that he was working on something. I might have even told him that I had a literary agent who pitched the idea of a Knicks book to me.
Okay.
At one point I didn't have the idea initially, and he pitched the idea to me and was like, I've already talked to plenty of publishers that would have a big interest in a Knicks book. They just, it's just a matter of me or another literary agent finding the right author. And, a couple of people had mentioned my name to my literary agent. Okay. So he asked me first to do it. I actually said no a time or two, because I was like, it sounds like a huge undertaking. I don't know anything about those teams. I was 5 when Pat Riley got hired. So I was actually 4 when Pat Riley got hired. So I wasn't really that intrigued by it at first, just because I was like, I don't know anything about that. I'd have to research all day long, for a long time to do it. But then, I thought about it. I was like, well, I don't have a family. I don't have kids. Maybe it would be smart to do it and, put some money away for a home or something like that, which now I live somewhere. That's not
Congratulations.
Thank you. But, I agreed to it, and we announced the deal. And then I think as I started really researching and really trying to dig in and find contact information for people, I think it was then that I would do like Twitter searches for things. And I remember one day coming across Paul was reaching out to different former players through Twitter. And I remember seeing some of his tweets. I was like, oh shit, he'd already started doing this.
Oh, wow.
And then when I would Google it, I'd see that he had, I think on his website, that he had like an image. And I think at one point, maybe the title of his book was different than what it ended up being. The book he ended up writing was called Knicks of the 90s.
Yep.
But he had a website that was talking about the fact that a book was coming soon. And so I was like, does he have a publisher? And, I looked at it. So I basically, when he and I talked, I think what ended up happening is that, quite frankly, I think what ended up happening is that because I've been in the industry for a while, and because I linked up with with an agent who's been in the business for a long time, we were able to get a book deal. But from the way Paul described it to me, I think that first of all, I think that he had started his process already, but I think because he hasn't been as entrenched in the industry as I am, that you probably have to submit more of a finished product to a publisher beforehand.
I understand.
So when I learned that, I felt horrible, because he basically I think he would have met with the same people I did to try to sell the book, to sell his version of the book. But I just think that my literary agent kind of pushed me forward in that process first. And because I was a little bit more of a known name, that it probably could move faster. But I felt really bad about that. So anyway, I bring all that up to answer your original question. Paul did a really nice job with his book. Certainly for someone that my understanding is his background is that he's a lawyer. I mean, he did a lot of work. I think he interviewed 80, 90 people. He unearthed some details that have not been out there before. So, I mean, I would never say that someone can't do it. I think it's a big undertaking to do it the way he did it. Certainly the way I did it. I do think that it helps to have some grounding in journalism. I think more than anything, I think because you're going to get different versions of the same story of how something broke down. I think for me, even for me, trying to explain like the Pat Riley, Dave Checkett's feud that basically unraveled, that version of the Knicks. I still am, kind of scratching my head over certain details of it. I try to explain it the best I can. I try to explain both viewpoints, maybe even a third viewpoint from kind of the Heat side of it. But it's hard. And it's and it's something where like I had lawyers read over, every word of what I wrote, not just for that, but the entire book, because it's complicated and these are people's lives and you don't want to. And particularly, I think the other thing to add about this particular project for me or for Paul, this is stuff that happened 20, 30 years ago. And so people's memories are not the sharpest in every case. You're trying to confirm stuff the best you can with multiple people at every turn. But I think it can be done. And you get some people that aren't journalists at all, that are just authors and they really haven't written for newspapers much or haven't written for newspapers in years. And they are still really good at this as far as book writing and just kind of building the drama and building, a certain tone in their writing. So it's doable. I just think it's difficult. And it would be difficult for anyone, but you really, I think this was probably the case for Paul. And I know it's the case for me. I was fortunate that, when I was at 538, when I was writing this thing, that I had requested essentially a book leave, a leave of absence to write the book.
Okay.
And they were like, look, if you can just write every now and then, maybe once a week, every now and then, maybe once every 2 weeks, we can probably live with that and fill in the rest of the gaps for you. Okay. That way you don't have to stop taking a paycheck and we can still have you on the site. We would, that's why we brought you here. You can take the leave if you really need it, but we'd prefer you to stay on. And I said, okay. So I kept doing that, but still having to watch a lot of basketball and, having to watch a lot of basketball for my day job and trying to write a book. It's really difficult. And I think for most people, it's hard to do that when it's not your only focus. And so to Paul's credit and to anyone else, people that have families, people that have, a day job like I did, people that have a busy day job, even during the pandemic, when most people were just trying to stay afloat somehow between the virus and between trying to work or trying to stay safe, it's a lot to try to do it. So I think it's doable. I don't want to discourage anybody, but it's if you're doing a good job of it, unless you're just wildly talented, it's really hard. And, in this case too, it's factual. So you're having to interview a lot of people to just nail down all the facts. It's a really hard process. And I look forward to it again someday, hopefully, if I can find the right subject, but I don't necessarily look forward to it like right now or really soon because it's hard.
So I have other questions on the book, but I'm going to save them for when we hopefully when I can have you on again after I've read the book. But I do want to get to a little bit of the Knicks, the current Knicks, not the Knicks of the 90s. Although there are some connective tissue there, and maybe the NBA. Let me start here because what I loved about when you. And what I wouldn't do to have you back when you used to write about the team every day is you just you had in my personal opinion, a better sense for the kind of the fabric of the organization and things that like there, the reasons why things did not go well a lot of the time. And we've talked about them in the past and like what it would take to get out of them. And now we're here. And it feels, dare I say, hunky-dory. Everybody's on, kind of looking in the same direction and it seems to be going well. I know they don't have, the roster yet and what have you, but do you buy that this organization has turned things around and take that to mean whatever you want it to mean?
I think, and I remember feeling this way when I covered the team in 12-13, where they won 54 games kind of out of nowhere and were 2 seed. And there was that question. And I mean, the difference there was that as soon as they did that, and as soon as they got ready to start the next season, they fired Glenn Grunwald, on the eve of training camp or whatever, on media day or whatever it was. So what I would say even with that caveat, is that I think you need to see a couple seasons in a row of that. It's nice to have one unexpectedly good season. I think it's harder now when teams are going to be keying out for you a little bit more.
Sure.
It does appear to be healthier. Obviously, winning will make people feel a lot better about that. But there's at least stability, even if you complained about what the Knicks did in the offseason, which I think it became a little bit tougher to criticize it when you saw the team options and everything like that on the third year of a lot of these deals. There's at least stability, which you have not always been able to say that about this team. If you felt like there were anvils on this team that really weighed things down, at least in one case in the starting lineup, I think you can tell I'm talking about. That's not there anymore. You're getting Mitchell Robinson back. And you frankly upgraded at least one of the positions in the starting lineup, maybe two. I think most people would probably say that Fournier is a step up from Bullock. Although
in some areas, yeah.
Exactly. And so, I mean, it's easy to see the upside here. I think the conflict that I think you're seeing between there's kind of some people in the media and kind of in the analysis world that don't feel all that strongly about what the Knicks did. And then there's some people that think that they hit a home run or at least a double or a triple. And I think the conflict is the Knicks, even while they played well last year, that they played above their heads last year. And so there's some regression coming this year. And I think that's a completely fair rationale if you're not high on them. I think that you could probably find nuance even within that rationale as well to say that you think the Knicks might do well. Sure, Julius Randle was wildly solid or wildly great last year as far as his MVP candidate level. Yeah. We shouldn't expect for him to be that good, but at the same time, his shot should be a little bit easier this year. And hopefully. You could say that about everybody else. And so I think that's kind of the question that I have, that a lot of people have, is how much easier do those shots get? And even with that being the case, I still don't know that you would expect him to shoot and play as well as he did last year. But I don't think it matters whether he and the other guys play as well during the regular season. I think it's more having more offensive options in the playoffs, assuming that they get there. Sure. Now they've made the playoffs, so that really shouldn't be the goal anymore. It should be to try to win around, if not more than that. But I buy the fact that they should be back this year in the playoffs. And once you can do that for a couple of years in a row, I guess they're not a young group. It's gotten really easy to say that they're a young group. They obviously have younger guys that are in key roles, but they also have a lot of vets. I think it's completely realistic to see them back in the playoffs. And I think if you're in their position, you just want to string that together a couple times. That's essentially what Brooklyn did. And Brooklyn landed a couple of stars that way. Granted, one being unvaccinated, but we could talk about that another time. I think we might talk about it now. I think that's what you want. By the way, the Knicks being fully vaccinated, it's crazy to think that they're the team that is like not making noise just because, they're not in the news or they're not the overly dramatic story right now. So I think that is a step in a positive direction. I don't know how positive, but I think we'll have a better sense of that by the end of the season.
I completely agree. I want to ask you real quickly about Kemba. I usually come up with one crazy theory before every season. And this season's crazy theory is that I think they should try to play Kemba every day. And they should try to play him 22, 24, maybe 26 minutes a night, because I obviously did not watch a ton of Boston last year, but my understanding from listening to people who report on them and write about them every day is that the inconsistency, him being in the lineup, out of the lineup, was really not something that was ideal for them. And wouldn't it be nice if he could just be there every day and maybe just lessen those minutes? Obviously neither of us are doctors. We don't know, is that the type of thing that would work? What I'm curious from you, and to as much as you could shed some light on this, is like, do you have any sense of like how those decisions get made? So you have like a player who's a pretty prominent player, like he has his team of people, his agents or whatever. You have the Knicks. Like, is there some kind of like standard way these things happen? Does it change depending on the organization? Like, how do you think, if you, again, for whatever insight you could offer, how do you think they'll go about figuring out like, okay, what are we going to do with Kemba this year?
What I'll say from, the time I've spent covering the league and either paying close attention to Chicago because I felt like I had to, being from here and having a lot of friends that are just diehard Knicks fans. I guess Bulls fans. I was a diehard Bulls fan as a kid when, during, I guess, the part of the Jordan era that I was old enough to actually watch, understand. And then, I guess until I went to college or high school or whatever it was. But, paying pretty close attention to the Thibodeau teams in Chicago, there was never such a thing really as him managing guys' minutes or really monitoring guys' minutes. And, you could make the argument that backfired. Who knows how much of it was that versus guys that were just kind of injury prone to begin with, stuff that would have happened anyway. It's hard to know. But what I'll say is that I can't remember a time where Tom wasn't finding a way to justify the minutes that he was giving someone, as far as he's giving them all these minutes and now he's finding a way to justify it. I remember when I covered I don't think it was his introductory press conference in Minnesota. It might've been his second year.
Okay.
And I remember it was the year that they landed like Gibson and Rose and a couple other people. I'm trying to remember who else they got on that team.
It was Jimmy and Jeff Teague, I think, were the other guy.
Yeah, it might have been that season. You're right. It was the year they added Teague. You're right.
Yeah.
And I remember people were asking him about how he utilized Cat and Wiggins. And I think they had played like all 82 games. Wiggins certainly had. Maybe Towns had too. And there were only like 9 guys in the league that had done that, or maybe 11 or 13 or something. But Tom, instead of Tom saying, we played them a lot of minutes. Obviously, he mentioned how young they were, which he did that with RJ and he did that with Julius as well. But then this is the thing, because you get people that are armed with data and use data really well, and they use it to make the point you agree with or that you're more compelled to agree with. Tom does that to justify his own thinking. And so I remember when he was asked a question about Cat and Wiggins, he was like, well, look, they're durable. They're young. They can take it. Their bodies can take it. And oh, by the way, we signed 3 of the other 9 guys in the league that also played 82 games this past season. So we're set. Our guys can play. We know they can do it. And I'm like, I don't know if that's the way you want to think about this. Like, yes, they're durable. They were durable last year, but does that mean you want to take them out and roll them out 82 games? And I think Taj was one of those guys, and he used that as a talking point. And it showed me how prepared he was to talk about that specific question. So Tom, in my experience, has never been looking to utilize someone less than they're used to being utilized. It's more normally. And I mean, I know there was the joke made at the media day. Kemba, I think it was Mark Berman or someone asked Kemba, how much is he going to play? And he was like, I mean, I guess you would have to ask Tom. And he was like, he's going to play. And it was funny, but it wasn't, I didn't actually see it to be a joke as much as everyone else did. Because I get the impression that he's going to want to run him out there as often as he can. I won't say until someone tells him that he can't necessarily, because I think Kemba may not even want that. And also you have a very capable backup. You've got a couple of capable backups. But I don't think that he was completely kidding about that. I think he does want to use him as much as he can. I mean, within reason, but I don't think he's looking to have Kemba out there for less than 28, 30 minutes a game. It would be great to see him potentially play 24, 25 minutes. Maybe that's a little bit low, but if you've got Rose there, maybe whoever's got the hot hand and whoever you're finishing games with to be able to balance that out. But I don't think Tom's going to do that. I could be completely wrong. I haven't covered the team in several years, but I don't think he wants to run anybody out there less. I think he always is looking for a way to try to, give them more minutes. And I think more than likely we see Kemba take certain nights off so that he can play longer minutes in the other nights. That would be my guess if I had to guess.
I would bet you a beer if I had any confidence that I was right, but I don't. That's why it's my crazy theory. I just a couple more, and I promise I'm going to get you out of here. You mentioned him before, or you implied him before. Kyrie is he's doing his thing across the river. I shouldn't say across the river because I'm in Brooklyn. I don't know how to have a discussion about this because it's so multifaceted, and I think we all have the same opinions about vaccination and what have you. There's there's never really been a rivalry between the Nets and the Knicks, like not a legitimate one. And like, it feels like there's the start of one maybe that started last season. And now this is all happening. I'm starting to think like, well, like, does this add to the rivalry? Like, how do you think New York will react to Kyrie being whatever he's being right now? Because like, this situation is fascinating to me. And I don't know what to make of it, because there are just like, he is just a really unique guy and he is planting his flag. And I like, what do you make of all of this, even aside from like the Knicks angle?
Yeah, I'm a little bit in the same spot that you are, where I'm a little bit tired of it's a personal choice thing. I get that it is, but it's certainly not.
It's not. It's not.
You know, it's personal, but it also has the ability to impact other people. I was befuddled as hell by Bradley Beal's response yesterday about how he wasn't sick, but all that happened was that he lost a sense of smell. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. I wonder if anyone would say that they weren't sick. They just lost the ability to use their one of their five bodily
senses
function. Well, that or their bodily function. You know, people keep saying if erectile dysfunction was a symptom of this, you know, how much quicker guys would get the vaccine. And I'm like, yeah, I wonder if anyone would say that they're not sick if that happened. Sense of taste and smell seems kind of important. I know I like food enough for it to be important to me. So
you and me both.
So, you know, I don't know what to make of that. It's certainly frustrating. It is interesting. I mean, I'll put it this way. It certainly puts a decision on the table for him. I don't think the Nets would trade him, but if you have someone that theoretically can't play in their home games, you know, and you're playing half of your games at home, obviously, that becomes a pretty big decision, you know, for him and for Wiggins. It's the same case with the Warriors, where they've got the same rule in place in San Francisco. So, you know, whether or not, I don't know. It's very, very interesting. My hunch is that both him and Wiggins will end up getting vaccinated because it's a lot of money to leave on the table.
Nothing would shock me.
Nothing would shock me at this point, but I just feel like that's a lot of money to leave on the table to potentially leave a contending team that by all accounts probably should be favored. I think even if Kyrie didn't play, they might still be favored and maybe would deserve it. So, you know, to sit out that, I imagine at some point someone's going to get more frustrated, whether it's the Nets, who have said essentially all the right things, that they have his back. Yeah. I get that I get how it is a personal choice, but it also seems to extend way beyond that, where it has the ability to impact more than you as a person. And clearly the league is trying to tighten the screws on these guys by, you know, making everything impossible to do, eating with your teammates, being in the same part of the locker room as your teammates, you know, having to do sign language with your teammates because you can't actually speak to them, or whatever else it will be at some point. You know, and obviously if you can't play your home games, that is a huge part of it. So if we were talking about a 30 game, 15 game season, which you would never have that, and you were talking about 7 or 10 games or 15 games, that's one thing. But we're back to an 82 game schedule now. So I just don't see how anybody would realistically sit out and lose out on half their paycheck. I just kind of feel like something's going to give here really soon. I don't know what it'll be. I don't know if there's going to be more of an effort for religious exemptions. I know Wiggins got denied on his, a few days ago. I don't know what it's going to come to, but it's frustrating. And I mean, honestly, you know, it's not to say how anybody should feel. Maybe I am doing that. I'm not sure. But, you know, for Kyrie, he does have I remember Woj had used the phrase disruptor in that tweet, and people were upset about it. He is pretty anti. And I think that by itself generally is okay. And I think, honestly, he's ended up on the right side of a handful of issues, I think, by being anti. I think, you know, quite frankly, I can't help but think about the bubble and him saying it's not a good idea to do it. Let's sit out. People were frustrated then by the messenger because of the fact that Kyrie wasn't even going to play in the bubble. So it's like, why is he the one making this argument on behalf of everybody else? But then, you know, Jacob Blake happened, and the Bucks decided not to play that game against Orlando in the playoffs. And George Hill went as far as to say, we shouldn't have even ever come out here. This isn't going to solve anything. So you had a lot of players that thought that. You had LeBron at one point walk out of a meeting that some people thought might spell the end of the league for that season. So I think you had other people that agreed with him. I just think that because he's kind of checked out or kind of opted out of so many things the last few years, it prompts certain people to not take him seriously. But he's not always wrong. But this one, I think he's wrong about. And it's a little bit frustrating. It's more than a little bit frustrating because it's, he's someone that has roots to the Native American community, that claims to take those roots seriously. And, I'm a Black man. I know how it's hit the Black community. I think maybe the only community that's been hit harder than the Black community is the Native American community. And so I think when you think about that, and you think about the fact that there are players that have suffered real loss over the course of this, and the NBA talks constantly about how it's a brotherhood. It's not to say that guys should get the shot just because Karl Anthony Towns has suffered loss. Yeah, it is. There is a dissonance there, and listening to how shattered he is as a person, and then hearing other people talk about how I'm going to do my own research, and then ask really elementary level questions about this virus or how you could still get the virus after you've been vaccinated. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, I'm really happy you said that about Kyrie and about how sometimes it's just like being anti is in and of itself doing good. And then I go read what Kareem had to say in the Rolling Stone piece, and like Kareem, I mean, I'll defer to you on this. Has anyone done more for Black athletes, for Black people in this country? I mean, he's up there. I think he knows what he's talking about, and the way he phrased some of those things. And I would encourage anybody who hasn't read that piece to go read his particular
very strong wording
and not accidental wording. I trust that Kareem chose his words carefully. I don't. It's what do you do? What do you say about it? And I am just like you, very fascinated to see where this all goes. And more than anything, I hope we eventually get out of this and get back to whatever's going to be normal, man. Because I don't know what that's going to look like, but
can't wait. Hopefully, I cannot wait for that day to come.
Yeah. I've taken up way too much of your time. Before I let you go, can you just remind folks at home, where they could find you and read your stuff, but probably more importantly, maybe a little bit of information about the book and when it's coming out?
Sure. Well, thank you so much again for having me. I always have a good time talking with you guys. I am at Herring, HERRING _NBA on Twitter. It's pretty much the only social media I really use to promote my stuff.
Me and you both.
Yeah, I need to get better about that, particularly as I got a book coming out. But
no, you don't. You don't need to get. But Twitter's fine.
I hope so. So you can find my stuff there. I write for Sports Illustrated. Hopefully, get back to writing pretty soon. I know they need something from me later this week, as far as a story. But there's that. I co-host a podcast of my own on Open Floor, normally once a week for Sports Illustrated. And as far as the book is concerned, it's essentially done at this point. I'm just making final little tweaks and edits to it. It will be out January 18th, but would love and encourage anybody that's listening to pre-order it. It sounds like begging a little bit. It probably is. That when you pre-order a book, you don't actually get charged for it until you actually receive the book, until the day it's out. So the book doesn't come out till January 18th of next year, a couple months. But there's so many people that are like, oh, I'm just going to wait and buy it in person, which I totally get that. I used to be that person too. But in understanding the book industry more, pre-orders, if you had to pick between one and the other, pre-orders are actually probably more helpful to the author that you want to help in a lot of cases, because of the fact that the booksellers, everybody from not just Amazon, but certainly the brick and mortar stores, Barnes and Noble, the independent stores, they have a better sense of what to stock their shelves with if they see a book is landing a lot of pre-orders. And so there's a better shot that someone is going to see the book in a bookstore if there are a lot of pre-orders behind it, because they say, oh, a lot of people want to buy this, so let's make sure we have a bunch of copies of it ourselves. So it ends up being really helpful. It doesn't cost anybody anything to mark down a pre-order. And then you also get it the day it comes out, so it seems like a small thing, but it's a massive thing. I think particularly for first-time authors like myself to basically get off on a good foot. So people have asked me that question. It's wildly helpful. Any support that people lend is greatly appreciated. Hopefully the fans that listen to you guys know that I have great respect for you all. I've always loved dealing with you all for the most part. And so I appreciate all the support that people have already lent. I feel like it also feels guilty why I need to tap into other social media sites. I also feel like people on Twitter, like, we know your book is coming out. We've seen you tweet about it. So I need to start hitting up people on other sites, but it's been, the reception has been wonderful. And these are people that haven't even read the book yet. So I'm hoping that it resonates with them when they get a chance to read it, but I'm already grateful for the support that I've already gotten for it. So thank you for giving me a chance to plug in and talk about it.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Cannot wait to read it. Blood in the Garden is the name. It is, goodness. It's been tabbed on my mental list for a while. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Herring,